Hello and welcome to Deconstructing the Construct, episode 61. This episode is essentially part 2 of an intended 3-part series. If you haven't seen episode 60, please go back and do that first before watching this one. Thank you. As I mentioned in episode 60, things are seen first, then experienced in the energetic, and then play out in the physical. So to try and do this is in a chronological order, what was noticed was that life, the construct itself, started to get difficult, obstacles, hardships. It could be problems within family or financial, relationships, work. There was a distinct change in the flavour of life experience. And for some it started as early as May of last year. Wherever the virus exists or existed in ourselves or in those around us, it was being agitated. The dial was being turned up. And then in January, micro to macro, our personal lives, for many, started to reflect the themes that are playing out on the global stage. So the cleanup of the deep state, the cleanup of the swamp, the fraud, the lies, the manipulations, the deceptions that are bit by bit being revealed on a global stage, political stage, were also starting to show up in our personal lives. Many had discovered that someone near and dear had been lying to them for years, or had been manipulating a situation or circumstance, had been managing people's perceptions about them, had been stealing from them, or it was all starting to play out personally. There was also a lot of people finding themselves on the receiving end of a lot of unfounded accusations, fear-based accusations, outrageous accusations that really didn't have any basis in reality or logic, and were just coming from a place of hatred, viciousness and fear. Now, just as everything the proverbial they do in order to attack us, hurt us, squeeze us, control and manipulate us, it always bites them on the arse, because what this also proved out to be was an amazing opportunity for heart source beings to stay in their hearts, to understand that love is all that matters, to clear their own programs, to release their own fears, doubts and concerns. And for those who really embraced that, it's been an amazing period of growth. And then in February, we had the much talked about 24-hour whiteout on the Schumann resonance. It started on the 16th of February at 1900 hours and went for exactly 24 hours. It's my understanding that this was the first large-scale transfer of consciousness from these bodies to our home bodies. Because realms 2 and 3, 2 being home, 3 being the realm Lila created for those who need more time, are still physical realms. We have bodies in those realms. They're different to the ones we have here, but it's still a physical experience. It was at that time that it was discovered that there was an issue, something blocking a smooth transfer. And on the 27th of February is when Lilo, and accompanied by many others, hacked in the back door and changed the code that prevented our minds from moving forward, because it was discovered in that initial transfer. And then exactly 28 days later, on March 16, the same thing was observed on the Schumann a 24-hour whiteout at the same time. This, I do believe, was the second attempt at a major transfer of consciousness, and it should have been a lot easier now with those codes cleaned up and changed. But again, something was up. I know a lot of people do feel the effects of when the Schumann whites out, and the general consensus is that we are being bombarded with and the recipient of energies that these meters are picking up. But it's my belief, understanding, that it is in fact a transfer of data, of consciousness. It was also around this time in March that, for the first time in many, many years, the moon was brought to my attention. And what I could only describe as data facilities, record facilities, I knew there were a lot of our records that were also false records, those records that have been used to keep us in the rinse and repeat cycle all those years, the false Akashic records, all of that. And that there was an attempt to access them. And it didn't feel good in terms of who was trying to access them and what they were planning on using them for. And then came April 13, which was 28 days after the March 16 whiteout, and I was fully expecting another 24-hour period. However, and I don't have graphs unfortunately to support this, but not only the Schumann, but many of the other meters and graphs that we all observe started to glitch, black out, and go offline around that time. However, it was felt still, energetically and physically. I don't think they wanted us to see what was actually happening. Only this time it wasn't as consistent or smooth. There was static. There was a disturbance in the force. It was a fast and furious time, especially that last week leading up to Easter. And there were many signs and symptoms that we were heading for a very distinct reset attempt. One of them, what really kicked it off, I guess, was an experience by one of the members that played out in a dream, and it was signifying the split. A split was about to take place. And through the group all putting our pieces together, what we were quite sure of was that coming up to Easter there was about to be a crucifixion. It was all about the theme of crucifixion, saviour, betrayal, the whole Judas, as if they were trying to create a new saviour for the new reset, the new loop, but this time it was going to be female. So again, April 13, when we expect to see a 24-hour whiteout, instead we see all the meters go glitchy. And then on April 15, we have the Notre Dame fire, which I do believe was planned to happen over the Easter weekend. Now, part of the story with the Notre Dame fire is the crown of thorns. Depending on which story you hear, either the crown of thorns was removed days before as part of the removal of other artifacts and statues and things, or a human chain of firefighters and clergy was created in order to save them. But there was an emphasis on the crown of thorns. So regardless of the original nefarious, dark intent for that fire, yet again, it's one of those things that kind of burnt them, bit them on the arse. Because what it seemed to do instead was not only release all of the dark energy held in that place, but completely undermined and wiped out their intended investment in whatever they were planning on playing out over the Easter weekend. And a really strange thing happened as a result. for the very first time, for me at least, what the crown of thorns really represents was shown. And it was seen as a piece of technology, energetic technology, placed on the heads of many beings, which feeds, among other things, the program of the victim, the program of the sacrifice, the warrior, the hero, the saved and the saviour, the martyr, all of that stuff. And it was an insidious piece of technology. And once removed from one was removed from all. Not that we knew it at the time, but as I mentioned in the previous DTC, episode 60, a pocket realm had been created inside this realm, realm 5. So what we were essentially experiencing throughout February, March and April were attempts to transfer our consciousness back home into our home bodies, while at the same time there was a counter effort to pull our consciousness into this pocket realm. And it seems, regardless that the Easter weekend didn't go as planned, energetically they were moving forward. And for me, what started to be seen very subtly on the 21st, Easter Sunday, in the Schumann resonance was the beginnings of that. What you can see here, just starting, is the very subtle, fine white spots that become, over the following days, something of a grid-like pattern that I'd never seen before. And I believe that this was a full-on attempt to pull our consciousness into this pocket realm. Now, in amongst all of this, on April 30, those responsible for what we could feel as deception and discord, some serious fuckery, even though we didn't know exactly what it was in terms of a pocket realm, were confronted both in the energetic and via the technology that I speak to people through. And then a week later, on May 8, those responsible were apprehended, their soul memories wiped, and they were held accountable. And as a consequence, that pocket realm was deleted. And as you can see on this Schumann, 2 days later, on the 10th, that grid-like pattern stopped abruptly, with 2 of those blackouts, which for me are not necessarily timeline jumps, as corrections back into 0 point, no time. So to recap, this virus is not contained and was not contained just in our little pocket realm. It spread beyond here and moved and infected all of realm 5 and 4 and even into home, the old home, the original home, which is why home needed to be cleaned up and upgraded and updated. That there were those at home who had been infected, who were part of a conspiracy to try to keep this game running. Plan A was to aggravate and amp up the virus within us all, basically put us through tests, but the tests were rigged. We were rigged to fail, to justify deleting us. But that wasn't working, because heart-sourced beings were stepping up to the plate and stepping up to the challenge and staying in their hearts and understanding that love is the only thing that will get us through this. So plan B was to create this pocket realm. And and that at the opportune time and at the opportune moment when the major transfer of consciousness was happening, to hijack that. And that too has failed. And to my knowledge, we are back on track. Okay, so just a few side notes. Since 1905 in France, when they did a separation between church and state, and I'll leave a few links in the description, France is the only country where the church does not actually own the property of the Catholic Church. The state does. So I think what we've all learned is that everything they do is an attempt to kill as many birds with a single stone as possible. And it's not just physical, it's also energetic. So one of the things that this fire at Notre Dame, but not just that, the vandalising of Catholic churches all over France for the last year or so, very much to me has a financial element. And Notre Dame, this Notre Dame fire alone, is a great pretext for an awful lot of money coming into the country. So there's a financial benefit, but there was also the energetic. My last side note here is on I Pet Goat 2. Since the Notre Dame fire, I know a lot of people have revisited this because of this scene right at the end there where it is interpreted as Notre Dame coming down. For me, this is exactly how things played out. Now, I know for many people they interpret this character as either Christ or the Antichrist. But for me, it's the artist's best attempt at a representation of our original, pure blueprint, the original human. The first thing you see is this character on his boat coming through this doorway. And many people seem to think it's either representing a vagina or even a throat, but I actually believe it is the door of the cathedral, the Notre Dame Cathedral itself. Because as he moves along and you start to get the cathedral in full view behind him, you can actually see the doorway he just came out of. The other part of this clip that's noteworthy for me is the feet to the fire. Throughout this clip, this character's feet are on fire. And that seems to be exactly where we've been. Our feet have been held to the fire. We've been tested, we've been pushed, but the game and the tests were rigged. And it's immediately after the cathedral comes down that he wakes up. You can see the light come back into his eyes, the fire comes back into his eyes, and the crown of thorns disappears. And that's exactly the course of events that played out for me. So thank you for joining me for part 2. I will get part 3 together as quickly as I can, which will be focused on the physical symptoms and how this was all affecting us personally, whether it was physically, emotionally, or situationally. So see you then. Bye for now.